My grandfather looked straight at my parents and demanded to know why strangers were living in the lake house he had given me. I sat there frozen. I did not even know I owned a home, but it got worse. He told them the tenants claimed they were renting directly from my mother and father. In that split second, I realized my whole life had been built on one massive lie. My name is Charlie Drake, and as I sat at the far end of the mahogany dining table, I felt less like a family member and more like a stain on the upholstery that everyone was politely trying to ignore. The air inside my parents' house in Hawthorne Hills was thick with the scent of roasted duck, expensive pine candles, and unspoken judgment. It was Christmas Eve, a night that was supposed to be about warmth and homecoming, but for me, it felt like entering a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. The room was suffocatingly beautiful. Gold fairy lights draped over the mantelpiece like jewelry, and the 12-foot fir tree in the corner was so laden with crystal ornaments that it looked like it might collapse under the weight of its own opulence. Outside, the winter wind howled against the double-paned glass, but inside, the thermostat was set to a perfect 72 degrees. I adjusted the hem of my dress under the table, hoping no one would notice the fraying thread near the knee. It was a hunter green velvet piece I had found on a clearance rack for $19.99, chosen specifically because the dark fabric hid how thin I had become. I was 29 years old, yet sitting here, I felt like a child who had been sent to the corner. My stomach rumbled, a sharp reminder that my last real meal had been a cup of instant noodles 14 hours ago. Thomas, the wine is exquisite. My mother, Rachel, cooed, tilting her glass to catch the light. She was wearing a silk blouse that probably cost more than my entire student loan payment for the year. Is this the 2015 vintage? My father, Thomas Langley, beamed, puffing out his chest. He looked the picture of suburban success: tanned skin, manicured nails, a smile that showed off expensive dental work. It is indeed. Part of that new portfolio I acquired last month. You know how it is. Darling, business requires flexibility. You have to know when to hold and when to pour. He laughed at his own joke, a booming sound that grated against my nerves. I forced the corners of my mouth up, mimicking a smile. I was exhausted. My eyes burned from staring at screens for 10 hours a day at Luma Vista Analytics, where I worked as a data entry contractor. It was a job that sounded fancy on LinkedIn, but in reality involved me sitting in a windowless cubicle, keying in endless rows of meaningless numbers until my wrists ached and my vision blurred. I was barely making enough to cover the rent on my studio apartment, a damp box of a room near the highway where the heating worked only 40% of the time. And look at this, my sister, Lena, chirped, thrusting her hand across the table. A diamond ring sparkled on her finger, catching the candlelight. She was 24, glowing with the kind of health and vitality that only money could buy. Daddy got it for me as an early graduation present, even though graduation isn't until May. You deserve it, Princess, Thomas said, his voice dripping with affection. You have worked hard. I bit the inside of my cheek. Lena had spent the last 6 years finding herself through various art history and fashion marketing majors at a private university, all fully funded by the bank of Mom and Dad. Meanwhile, I was drowning. Every month was a terrified calculation of which bill I could skip. Electric or internet? Groceries or credit card minimum? I had come tonight mostly for the food, hoping to pack some leftovers to last me through the week, and perhaps to feel a shred of connection. But the connection wasn't there. It never was. So, Charlie, my mother said, turning her gaze toward me. Her eyes swept over my outfit, lingering for a microsecond on my scuffed boots before moving to my face. How is the job? Still doing that typing thing? It is data analysis support. Mom, I said, my voice sounding small in the cavernous room. And it is fine. It pays the bills. Does it? Lena asked, picking up a piece of artisanal bread. Because you look tired. Like really tired. Maybe you should ask Dad for some career advice. He is killing it with his new ventures. I am managing, I said, tightening my grip on my fork. I am hoping to move to a salaried position in 6 months. 6 months, Thomas scoffed lightly, shaking his head. You lack ambition. Charlie, that is your problem. You settle. Look at us. We take risks. That is how we built this life. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them that I didn't settle. I survived. I wanted to tell them that I had applied for better jobs. But without the safety net they provided Lena, I couldn't afford to take unpaid internships or wait months for the perfect role. I had to eat, but I said nothing. I just nodded, swallowing the lump of resentment in my throat along with a sip of water. At the far end of the table, my grandfather, Walter Hayes, sat in silence. He was a man of few words, with a posture as rigid as a steel beam and eyes that missed nothing. He had arrived from London 2 days ago, a rare visit that had put my parents on edge, though they tried to hide it. He had spent the meal quietly observing, cutting his meat with surgical precision, ignoring the boastful chatter of my father and the vapid complaints of my sister. The conversation drifted to Lena's upcoming trip to Europe. I am thinking 2 weeks in Italy, then maybe pop over to France, she was saying, counting off the countries on her manicured fingers. I need a mental break before the real world starts. Dad said he would cover the hotels. Of course, Rachel agreed. Travel expands the mind. I looked down at my plate. I couldn't even afford a bus ticket to the next town over, let alone a flight to Italy. The disparity wasn't just unfair, it was cruel. It felt like they were performing a play about a perfect family, and I was just a prop they kept around to make themselves look more benevolent. Suddenly, a sharp clinking sound cut through the air. Walter had set his crystal wine glass down on the table with deliberate force. The sound was not loud, but it was heavy, final. It stopped the conversation dead. Thomas froze, his wine glass halfway to his mouth. Rachel blinked, her smile faltering. Lena looked annoyed, as if the interruption was a personal affront to her travel plans. Walter did not look at me. He looked straight at my father. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were cold. 2 chips of flint in a weathered face. Thomas, Walter said. His voice was gravelly, low, and terrifyingly calm. Rachel? Yes, Dad? Thomas asked, his voice pitching up slightly. Is something wrong with the duck? We can have the cook. Explain to me, Walter interrupted, enunciating every syllable, why strangers are living in the house I gave you. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that sucks the air out of a room. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. I could hear the wind rattling the window pane. I frowned, confusion washing over me. What? I whispered. Thomas dropped his fork. It hit the edge of his plate with a harsh clang and bounced onto the tablecloth, leaving a smear of brown sauce. Rachel went pale, her skin turning the color of old parchment. I don't know what you mean. Dad, Thomas stammered. He reached for his napkin, dabbing at his mouth, though his lips were dry. What house? You have several properties. Do not play games with me, Walter said. He leaned forward, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fury behind his composure. The lake house, in Marigold Bay, the property I signed over 3 years ago, the one I specifically gave to Charlie. My heart stopped. I felt a physical jolt in my chest, as if I had been shoved. I looked from my grandfather to my parents, my brain trying to process the words. Gave to me? I choked out. Grandpa, I don't have a house. Exactly, Walter said, his gaze never leaving my father's face. Lena let out a loud sigh, rolling her eyes. Oh my God, is this going to be a whole thing? Can we not do drama on Christmas? Grandpa, you are probably just confusing it with one of your old investments. It is a misunderstanding, surely, Rachel chimed in, her voice shrill and fast. She reached out to touch Thomas's arm, her fingers digging into his suit jacket. Walter, you know how things get mixed up when you are traveling. You are 82 now. Memories can be slippery. Perhaps you are thinking of the rental property Thomas bought last year? Thomas seized on the lifeline. Yes, Yes, that must be it. Dad, you are tired. The jet lag. Your memory isn't what it used to be. We can discuss this in the morning when you are thinking clearly. He forced a laugh, a hollow, desperate sound. Let's have dessert. Lena, tell Grandpa about the hotels in Venice. Walter did not move. He did not blink. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his tweed jacket. My memory is excellent, Walter said softly. And just to be sure, I did not rely on it. I went there. The color drained from Thomas's face completely. He looked like a man who had just heard the trapdoor open beneath his feet. I flew in a week early, Walter continued, his voice relentless. I rented a car and drove to Marigold Bay. I wanted to surprise Charlie. I thought I would find her there, perhaps reading by the fire, finally enjoying the security I tried to provide for her. He paused, and his eyes flicked to me for the first time. There was no anger in them when he looked at me, only a profound, heartbreaking sadness. But Charlie wasn't there, Walter said. Instead, I found a minivan in the driveway. There was a grill smoking on the patio. A family of 4 was living there, a nice couple, a man named David and his wife. I felt dizzy. My hands were trembling in my lap. Marigold Bay. I knew the place. I had seen pictures of it on postcards. A wealthy enclave by the water. I had never been there. I couldn't afford the gas to get there. I walked up to the door, Walter said, turning his attention back to my father, stripping him bare with every word. And I asked them who owned the house. They told me they were renting it. They said they had signed a long-term lease 2 years ago. Dad, stop, Thomas hissed, looking around as if the neighbors might be listening through the walls. This is not the place. They told me, Walter raised his voice, overriding him, that they pay $2,400 a month in rent, and they told me they send that check every month to their landlord, Mr. Thomas Langley. The room spun. $2,400. My rent was $850, and I had to skip meals to pay it. I looked at my father. He was staring at the tablecloth, unable to meet my eyes. I looked at my mother. She was aggressively swirling her wine. Her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. I thought about the last 3 years. The nights I sat in the dark because I was afraid to turn on the heat. The student loan notices that kept piling up. The way my mother would sigh and tell me I needed to learn to be more financially responsible when I couldn't afford to buy Christmas presents. They knew, the whole time. They knew. I did not know, I whispered. My voice sounded strange, detached, as if it were coming from someone else. I didn't know I had a house. Of course you didn't, Walter said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Because they stole it from you. The warmth of the room vanished. The twinkling lights on the tree suddenly looked garish, mocking. The smell of the expensive duck turned my stomach. I looked at the people sitting around me, my blood, my family, and for the first time, I didn't see success. I saw thieves. And as I looked at Thomas, sweating in his Italian suit, I realized that the poverty I had been battling for years wasn't bad luck. It wasn't a lack of ambition. It was a manufacturing defect in my life, engineered by the very people who were supposed to protect me. This wasn't just a ruined Christmas dinner. This was the end of my life as I knew it. And as the shock began to recede, something else started to take its place. Something cold and hard and sharp. I wasn't the girl who sat at the kids' table anymore. The silence in the dining room stretched thin, vibrating with the tension of my grandfather's accusation, but inside my head, the noise was deafening. It was the sound of 1,000 memories crashing into one another, rearranging themselves into a picture I had been too blind to see. The words lake house and gift bounced around my skull, colliding with the reality of my life, a life defined by scarcity, by making do, by being the one who understood that there just wasn't enough to go around. Except, apparently, there was... I looked at my mother, Rachel. She was busy pretending to inspect a spot on the tablecloth, refusing to meet my eyes. I looked at Lena, who was pouty and confused, checking her phone under the table as if the family implosion was merely an inconvenience to her social calendar. Suddenly, I was 7 years old again. I remembered standing in the kitchen, staring at the last piece of chocolate cake. My mother had taken the plate from my hands and slid it over to Lena, who was barely 3. "You are the big sister, Charlie," she had said, her voice dripping with that cloying sweetness that masked a command. "You need to learn to yield. Lena is little. She needs it more. You are strong enough to go without." That had been the mantra of my existence. You are strong enough to go without. It wasn't just cake. It was everything. When I was 16, I begged for art lessons. I wanted to paint. I had talent. My teachers told me so. But Thomas had sat me down, looking grave, and explained that money was tight that quarter. He told me that real artists suffered for their craft and that he couldn't justify the expense. 2 months later, Lena was enrolled in private writing lessons because she needed an outlet for her energy. I remembered the day I received my acceptance letter to the state university. I had worked 3 summers bagging groceries to save for books. My parents clapped me on the back and told me how proud they were of my independence. They said it built character that I was taking out student loans. They said debt would teach me the value of $1. When Lena went to college 4 years later, Thomas wrote a check for her full tuition at a private liberal arts college without blinking. When I asked why she didn't have to take out loans, Rachel had sighed, looking at me with pity. "Oh, Charlie, don't be jealous. It is unbecoming. The market is different now. We want to give Lena a head start. Besides, you have always been the survivor. Lena is delicate." Delicate. That was the word they used to justify the gold plating of my sister's life while I was left to rust. The memory that stung the most, the one that made my breath hitch in my throat right there at the dinner table, was the day I graduated. I had expected, perhaps foolishly, that I might be allowed to stay in my childhood bedroom for a few months to save money while I looked for a job. Instead, Thomas had handed me a classified ad for a studio apartment complex next to the interstate highway. "It is time to fly, Charlie," he had said, clapping his hands together. "We are turning your room into a guest suite. You need to be out in the world. It is the best thing for you." I had moved into that apartment on a rainy Tuesday. It smelled of stale cigarette smoke and damp carpet. The heating unit rattled like a dying engine, and every time a semi-truck roared past on the highway, the windows shook. My rent was $850 a month. It took nearly half my paycheck from my first job as a receptionist. Meanwhile, Lena stayed home. She occupied the guest suite. She drove the car Thomas leased for her. She posted photos of her home office setup, which included a new laptop and a professional espresso machine, all while I was eating instant ramen 4 nights a week because I had to choose between fresh vegetables and paying off the interest on my student loans. I looked down at my hands, resting on the fine linen tablecloth. These hands were rough. They were dry from the cheap soap in the office bathroom at Luma Vista Analytics. I spent my nights entering data into spreadsheets until my eyes watered, terrified that if I typed too slowly, my contract wouldn't be renewed. I was paid hourly, no benefits, no sick days. If I didn't work, I didn't eat. I remembered calling my mother last winter, crying because my car had broken down, and I didn't have the $400 to fix the alternator. "Oh, honey," she had said, her voice distracted. I could hear the sound of a television in the background. "You really need to manage your finances better. Have you tried picking up extra shifts? We are a bit stretched right now with Lena's trip to Cabo coming up. She needs this break. Her anxiety has been terrible." I had hung up the phone and walked 3 miles to work in the snow. I had believed them. That was the sickest part. I had believed that they were just comfortable, not rich. I believed that business was up and down, and that I had just hit the down cycle of their parenting. I believed that my struggle was a necessary rite of passage, something that would make me a better person. I told myself that Lena was just lucky, and that I shouldn't be bitter. I had convinced myself that Walter, my grandfather, had forgotten me too. For the last 3 years, every time I asked about Grandpa, Thomas would wave his hand dismissively. "He is traveling," he would say, or, "He has become very solitary in his old age. Charlie, he doesn't want to be bothered by family drama. He is angry at the world. best to leave him be. I stopped writing to him because I thought he didn't want to hear from me. I thought I was a disappointment to him, too. The granddaughter who couldn't afford a nice car or a house, the one who was just scraping by. But then, 5 days ago, the letter had arrived. It wasn't the usual heavy cardstock invitation from my mother, the kind that felt like a summons. It was a plain white envelope, hand-addressed in shaky, elegant cursive. It had been sitting in my rusty mailbox, sandwiched between a flyer for pizza coupons and a final notice for my internet bill. I had opened it standing in the hallway of my apartment building, shivering because the front door didn't close all the way. My dearest Charlie, it read, I will be at your parents' house for Christmas Eve. Please come. We need to talk. I miss you. Do not let Thomas tell you I'm not there. Love, Grandfather. I had stared at that note for 20 minutes. I miss you. I had almost thrown it away. The shame of showing up in my old coat, the dread of answering questions about my dead-end job, the pain of watching Lena unwrap designer handbags. It was almost too much. But the line, we need to talk, had hooked something deep inside me, a curiosity, a longing, and perhaps a tiny, subconscious warning bell. So I had put on my $19 dress. I had spent an hour trying to cover the dark circles under my eyes with drugstore concealer. I had taken the bus to Hawthorne Hills because I couldn't afford the gas, walking the last half mile in the freezing wind, so I wouldn't have to explain why I didn't drive into the driveway. And now, here I was. The warmth of the house felt suffocating now, not cozy. The smell of the roast duck made bile rise in my throat. I looked at Thomas. He was sweating profusely now, dabbing his forehead with a napkin. I looked at the diamond ring on Lena's finger, a ring that likely cost more than I made in a year. And then I thought about the lake house. $2,400 a month. That money, my money, had paid for that ring. That money had paid for Lena's trip to Cabo. That money had paid for the wine Thomas was drinking. It wasn't just that they hadn't helped me, it was that they had actively fed off me. They had taken an inheritance meant to secure my future and used it to subsidize their lifestyle, all while watching me drown. They had watched me lose weight from hunger. They had watched me walk in the snow. They had lectured me on responsibility while spending the money that should have been in my bank account. I felt a shift inside my chest. It was a physical sensation, like a lock clicking into place. The sadness that had weighed me down for a decade evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I was not the unlucky one. I was not the responsible one. I was the victim of a long con. And the con artists were the people sitting right in front of me, passing the potatoes. Walter was watching me. His hands were folded on the table, calm and steady. He wasn't looking at Thomas anymore. He was looking at me, waiting to see if I had put the pieces together. I met his gaze. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just nodded, a microscopic movement that only he would see. The question of why strangers were living in my house was just the beginning. The real question, the one that made my blood run cold and hot at the same time, was how much more they had stolen from me. And I was going to find out every single cent. The atmosphere in the room shifted from awkward tension to the sharp, clinical air of an interrogation. Walter did not shout. He did not slam his fist on the table. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket with a slow, deliberate movement that made my father flinch. He pulled out a thick manila envelope and placed it on the white tablecloth. It looked jarringly out of place amidst the crystal wine glasses and the silver cutlery, a brown stain on their perfect holiday aesthetic. 3 years ago, Walter began, his voice level, I finalized the transfer of the deed for the property at 1204 Lakeside Drive, Marigold Bay. I transferred it legally, fully, and irrevocably to the sole ownership of Charlie Ann Drake. He slid a document out of the envelope and pushed it across the table toward me. I stared at it. It was a copy of a deed of gift, stamped and notarized. I saw the date. It was from November of 3 years ago. I saw my name. Grantee. Charlie Ann Drake. I felt a phantom weight press against my chest. 3 years ago. That was the winter my heater had broken and I had slept in 3 layers of clothes because I could not afford the repair. That was the winter I had sold my flute, the one thing I loved, just to pay for a root canal, and the whole time, I had owned a house by a lake. "Read the clause at the bottom, Charlie," Walter said gently. I squinted at the dense legal text. "The grantee holds exclusive rights," I read aloud, my voice trembling slightly. "No mortgage, lease, sublet, or sale of said property may occur without the direct notarized signature of the grantee. No power of attorney shall supersede this clause." Walter nodded. "I added that specific protection because I know this family. I know how things tend to flow toward the path of least resistance. And in this house, the path of least resistance has always been Lena, and the person expected to provide the resistance has always been you." Thomas cleared his throat. A wet, nervous sound. He picked up his wine glass, realized it was empty, and set it back down. "Dad, you are making this sound criminal," Thomas said, forcing a chuckle that sounded like dry leaves crunching. "It was a logistical decision. Charlie was, 26? She was working that temp job. She was hardly in a position to manage a property tax bill or handle maintenance. The roof needed work. The plumbing was old. We were protecting her." "Protecting me?" I asked, looking up from the paper. "By not telling me I owned it?" "We were going to tell you," Rachel interjected quickly, leaning forward. "When the time was right, when you were more settled. You know how overwhelmed you get. Charlie, we didn't want to burden you with asset management." "So you helped her," Walter said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He reached into the envelope again. "By signing this." He produced a second document. It was a residential lease agreement. The header read, "Blue Harbor Stays," a property management firm I had never heard of. "This is a 3-year lease agreement," Walter explained. "Between Blue Harbor Stays and a Mr. David Miller, the monthly rent is listed as $2,400. He pointed a bony finger at the bottom of the page. "And there is the landlord's signature." I looked. There, in black ink, was the name Charlie Drake. The room seemed to tilt. I stared at the signature. It was my name, certainly, but the C was too loopy. The E's at the end were too sharp. It was a good attempt, practiced perhaps, but it wasn't mine. I had signed thousands of forms at work. I knew the muscle memory of my own hand. I had never touched this paper. I had never seen this document. "I didn't sign this," I said. The realization was cold and numbing. "This isn't my handwriting." "Of course it isn't," Walter said. "Because you were never there. I spoke to the leasing agent at Blue Harbor Stays yesterday morning. A charming woman. She told me she has never met Ms. Charlie Drake in person. All documents were handled via courier and email by her representative, Mr. Thomas Langley." Thomas's face was now a mask of panic. I had to act as her proxy. The tenants needed to move in immediately. It was a great opportunity. Reliable people. I couldn't wait for Charlie to get off work and drive all the way out there to sign papers. I was acting in her best interest. "By forging her signature?" Walter asked. "That is a felony, Thomas." "It is not forgery if it is family," Thomas snapped, his voice rising. "I am her father. I manage everything for this family. I take the burden so they don't have to." "And the money?" Walter asked. "Where did the burden of the money go?" Thomas opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at the centerpiece of holly and ivy as if it were the most fascinating thing she had ever seen. "We are holding it for her," Rachel said weakly. "In a trust. We are looking for a better property, something closer to the city. We were going to surprise her with a down payment on a condo next year. That house in Marigold Bay is too isolated for a young single woman. It is dangerous." "A trust," Walter repeated. "Is that what you call it?" He pulled the final piece of evidence from the envelope. It was a stapled stack of bank statements. He didn't slide these across the table. He opened them and held them up, reading from them like a town crier announcing a verdict. "These are the transaction records for the account where the rent checks from Blue Harbor Stays are deposited," Walter said. "Account ending in 4599. That is your personal checking account. Thomas, not a trust, not a savings account for Charlie. He flipped the page. January 12th, deposit, $2,400. January 14th, payment to Land Rover Financial Services, $1,200. He looked at Thomas. That would be the car parked in the driveway. The one you told me was a bonus from a successful merger. He flipped another page. August 3rd, deposit, $2,400. August 5th, wire transfer to the Sorbonne University summer program, $4,000. He looked at Lena. Lena shrank back in her chair, clutching her napkin. "My summer art course," she whispered, her face pale. "You said, Daddy, you said you paid for that with your bonus." "He did not have a bonus, Lena," Walter said brutally. "He had Charlie's house." He continued reading, his voice relentless. September, Neiman Marcus. October, the Hawthorne Country Club annual dues. November, a payment to a credit card company for $5,000. He dropped the papers onto the table. They scattered, a paper trail of my stolen life. "There is not a single transfer to Charlie," Walter concluded. "Not 1 cent. For 3 years, you have collected $86,400 in rent from a property that belongs to your daughter, and she is sitting here in a dress she likely bought at a discount store, wondering if she can afford to turn on her heating tonight." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a facade crumbling. Thomas was breathing hard, his face red and blotchy. Rachel was crying now, silent, pitying tears that streamed down her cheeks. But I knew they were tears for herself, for the embarrassment of being caught. Everyone looked at me. They were waiting for the explosion. They expected the Charlie they knew, the emotional, slightly desperate girl who always pleaded for fairness, to start screaming. They expected me to flip the table, to throw the wine, to demand an apology. But I didn't feel like screaming. I felt calm. It was a terrifying, icy kind of calm. It was the feeling of standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing that the people behind you aren't trying to pull you back. They are the ones who pushed you. I looked at the forged signature on the lease agreement. It looked so confident. Thomas had signed my name with more authority than I ever had. He had stolen my identity, my property, and my security, and he had slept soundly every night for 3 years. I looked at Lena. She was wearing earrings that I had probably paid for. I looked at the food on the table. I had probably paid for that too. I wasn't a daughter to them. I wasn't a sister. I was an asset class. I was a resource to be mined. If they could do this, if they could look me in the eye for 3 years, watch me struggle, watch me count pennies, all while they were cashing checks written on my equity, then there was no limit. This wasn't just about a house. This was about a fundamental theft of my existence. They had stolen my time. They had stolen my opportunities. They had stolen my peace of mind. And if they were willing to commit felony forgery for a lake house, what else had they done? What other documents had Thomas signed with that practiced, fake hand? What other lies were buried in the logistical decisions he made for the family? I slowly reached out and picked up the lease agreement. I folded it neatly. Then I picked up the deed. I placed them both in front of me, under my hand. "Charlie," Thomas said, his voice cracking. "Sweetheart, listen. You have to understand the context. Business has been complicated. We were going to pay it back, every dime, plus interest. We are family. We don't keep score like this." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the fear in his eyes. He wasn't afraid of losing my love. He was afraid of what I held in my hand. "I am not keeping score, Father," I said softly. My voice was steady, clearer than it had ever been. "I am just looking at the accounting." I turned to Walter. "Do we have everything?" "We have copies," Walter said, his eyes gleaming with a fierce pride. "The originals are safe." "Good," I said. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply sat there, watching them squirm, realizing that for the first time in 29 years, I was the one holding the power. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I wasn't going to accept a check or an apology. I was going to take it all, I was going to peel back every layer of their lives until I found every single lie they had buried. "If you can steal a house," I said to the room, "I wonder what else you have taken." The question hung in the air, unanswered. As the grandfather clock in the hall chimed the hour, it was 8 o'clock. The night was just beginning. The truth is, my shock at the dinner table was a lie. My silence was not the paralysis of a victim discovering a crime. It was the discipline of a predator waiting for the trap to snap shut. I had not learned about the lake house 5 minutes ago. I had learned about it 72 hours ago, on a gray, slushy Tuesday afternoon. I had met Walter at a small, greasy diner called The Hangar, tucked away near the edge of Crescent Terminal Airport. He had just landed, and his text to me had been brief and urgent. When I walked through the door, shaking the snow off my threadbare coat, I saw him scanning the room. His eyes passed over me twice before he recognized me. That was the first knife in my heart. He was looking for the granddaughter Thomas had described to him in emails. Vibrant, successful, glowing with the health of a young woman who spent her weekends at a lake house. Instead, he saw a ghost. I was 20 pounds underweight. My skin was sallow from lack of sunlight, and my eyes were rimmed with dark circles that no amount of concealer could hide. "Charlie?" he had asked, standing up slowly. He looked older than I remembered, but his grip when he took my hand was iron hard. "My God, you look exhausted." I sat down, keeping my coat on because the diner was drafty. "I work a lot. Grandpa, it is good to see you." He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He reached into his leather satchel and pulled out a thick bundle of envelopes bound with a rubber band. He pushed them across the chipped Formica table. "I have written to you once a month for 3 years, he said, his voice tight. "I sent them to your parents' address, assuming they would forward them to your new home. Last week, the post office in London returned this batch. They were marked undeliverable." I picked up the top letter. It had been opened and then resealed with cheap tape. I looked at the postmark. It was dated 2 years ago. "Open it," he commanded. I tore the envelope. The letter inside was written on heavy, expensive paper. "My dearest Charlie," it read, "I hope the winter at Marigold Bay is treating you well. I imagine the fireplace in the main hall is keeping you warm. If the roof needs repairs, please let me know. I want that house to be your sanctuary. You work so hard. You deserve a place where the world cannot touch you." I read the next one. "Enclosed is a check for $5,000. I know the taxes are due soon. Please use the rest for yourself. Buy some paint. Make the room yours." I looked up at him, my vision blurring. "I never got these. I never got the checks. I never knew about a house." "I know," Walter said, and for the first time, I saw rage behind his spectacles. "I started to suspect 6 months ago. Thomas kept telling me how well you were doing, how much you loved the lake view. But then I would ask for a picture, and he would have an excuse. He said you were private. He said you were busy. Then, I saw a photo on Lena's social media. She was in Paris. Thomas told me he was having a lean year in business, yet his youngest daughter was shopping on the Champs-Élysées." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I realized the math did not add up. I was sending enough money to support you. Yet when I video called last Christmas, you looked like you were starving. I realized I was pouring water into a bucket with a hole, and I suspected the hole was named Thomas Langley." I put the letters down. My hands were shaking, not from cold, but from a sudden, violent realization. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the agency they had stolen from me. For 3 years, I had thought I was alone. I had thought I was failing at adulthood because I couldn't make ends meet. I had spent nights crying into my pillow, wondering why I wasn't good enough. But I wasn't failing. I was being robbed. They hadn't just taken my inheritance. They had taken my confidence. They had let me believe I was weak so they could feed on my strength. "I don't want to hear stories, Grandpa," I said, my voice hardening. "I want to see it. I want to see the paper trail." "Then let us go to the bank," he said. We drove to the Riverside Square branch of the National Bank where Thomas did his business. Walter, as the original grantor of the trust and property, had enough legal leverage to demand a view of the associated documents. We sat in a glass-walled office with a nervous branch manager. When the manager laid out the files, I felt like I was looking at a doppelganger. There were loans taken out in my name. There were authorization forms granting Thomas limited power of attorney for property management, forms I had never seen. There was a credit line opened against the equity of the house. "Who signed this?" I asked, pointing to a document authorizing a $50,000 renovation loan. "You did, Ms. Drake," the manager said, looking confused. "Or rather, Mr. Langley brought them in signed. He said you were unable to come to the branch during business hours." I looked at the signature. It was a loopier, more childish version of my own. It was the signature of a girl who didn't exist, created by a father who needed a scapegoat. "Print everything," I told the manager. "I want copies of every single transaction." After the bank, we got back into Walter's rental car. "Where to?" he asked. "Marigold Bay," I said. "I want to see my house." The drive took 2 hours. As we turned onto Lakeside Drive, the trees parted, and I saw it. It was exactly the kind of house I had drawn in my sketchbooks when I was a child. It was a white craftsman-style bungalow with a wide, wraparound porch. Large windows looked out over the steel-gray water of the lake. A chimney puffed gentle smoke into the winter air. It looked peaceful. It looked like safety. It looked like a home. But it wasn't mine. A pink tricycle was overturned on the front lawn. A plastic slide sat near the porch steps. A minivan was parked in the driveway. "Stay here," I told Walter. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and started the voice recorder app. I slipped it into the front pocket of my coat, leaving the microphone exposed. I walked up the driveway, my boots crunching on the gravel. I could smell wood smoke and barbecue sauce. I walked up the steps and rang the doorbell. A woman opened the door. She looked kind, tired, holding a toddler on her hip. "Hi," I said, forcing a bright, apologetic smile. "I am so sorry to bother you. My name is Charlie. I am a relative of the landlord, Thomas Langley." The woman's face lit up with recognition. "Oh, Mr. Langley. Yes, wonderful man. Is everything okay? We just sent the rent check on the first—" "Everything is fine," I lied smoothly. "He just asked me to swing by and check the condition of the gutters while I was in the area. He is thinking of doing some upgrades for you guys. You know how he is. Always worrying about the property." "He is great," the woman agreed, bouncing the baby. "We have been here 2 years and he has never raised the rent on us. $2,400 is a steal for this location. We signed a 3-year lease, but we are hoping to renew." "And you pay him directly?" I asked innocently. "Or does it go through a company?" "Direct deposit to his personal account," she said. "He said it saves on processing fees. Easier for everyone." "That sounds like Thomas," I said, feeling a cold sensation spread through my veins. "Well, the house looks beautiful. You have made a lovely home here." "Thank you," she said. "Tell him we said hi." "I will," I said. "I will tell him exactly what you said." I walked back to the car. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't look at the lake. I got into the passenger seat and closed the door. Walter was watching me, his hand hovering near my shoulder, ready to comfort a crying child. But I didn't cry. The time for crying had ended when I saw that tricycle. That tricycle represented the life I could have had, the stability, the peace, the ability to breathe without panic. My parents hadn't just stolen money. They had sold my peace to strangers for $2,400 a month. I gripped the steering wheel of the rental car, my knuckles turning white. I looked at Walter. "They think I am stupid," I said. "They think I am the nice, quiet daughter who will take whatever scraps they throw at me because I am afraid to lose them." "What do you want to do?" Walter asked. I thought about the dinner coming up in 3 days. I thought about Thomas's smug face. I thought about Rachel's fake concern. I thought of Lena's European vacation paid for with my rent money. "I don't want to sue them quietly," I said. "I don't want a settlement mailed to my apartment. I want to see their faces when they realize the game is over." I turned to Walter, and for the first time in years, I felt powerful. If they have turned my life into a business transaction, I said, then I want to be the one to close the deal. The 48 hours leading up to Christmas Eve were not spent baking cookies or wrapping gifts. They were spent in the library of the hotel suite my grandfather was renting, turning a family tragedy into a legal dossier. The room smelled of old leather and fresh printer ink. Rain lashed against the windows, blurring the lights of the city below. But inside, the air was still and focused. Sitting across from Walter and me was Caroline Price, a senior litigator from the firm Hayes and Alder. She was a woman who looked like she could cut glass with her jawline, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than my entire year's rent. "Let us review the board," Caroline said, clicking a pen. We had turned the large mahogany desk into a crime scene map. On the left were the letters Walter had sent me, the ones intercepted and hidden. In the center was the forged lease agreement with Blue Harbor stays. On the right were the bank statements we had pulled at Riverside Square. "We have clear evidence of mail theft," Caroline stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "That is a federal offense, though often hard to prove without a witness. However, the forgery is undeniable. The lease agreement bears a signature purporting to be yours. Charlie, dated June 4th. On June 4th, your employment records show you were clocked in at Luma Vista Analytics from 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening. You could not have been in Marigold Bay signing a lease." She moved a document to the center. "But this," she said, tapping a thick stack of papers I hadn't seen before, "is where it moves from simple theft to complex fraud." I leaned in. "What is that?" "While you and Walter were at the bank, I ran a full title search on the Marigold Bay property," Caroline explained. "I also ran a credit check on Thomas Langley using the public records associated with the address." She flipped the cover page open. 6 months ago, a secured business loan was taken out for $150,000, she said. "The borrower is listed as Langley Lifestyle Ventures, a limited liability company registered to your father. The company has no employees, no revenue, and no physical office other than a P.O. box." "And the collateral?" Walter asked, his voice low. "The lake house," Caroline said. "He put up the deed to the house as security for the loan. To do that, he had to present a notarized power of attorney claiming he had the right to encumber the asset." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "He mortgaged my house?" "Essentially, yes," Caroline said. "He forged a power of attorney document, witnessed by a notary who I suspect is either incompetent or complicit, and used your property to borrow $150,000. If Langley Lifestyle Ventures defaults on the loan, which, given the financials I am seeing, is inevitable, the bank would seize your home." My hands clenched into fists on my lap. It wasn't enough that he was stealing the rent. He was willing to risk the roof over my head for a shell company. "What did he do with the loan money?" I asked. Caroline slid a spreadsheet toward me. "It seems Langley Lifestyle Ventures exists primarily to pay off other debts. He used about $60,000 to pay off high-interest credit cards. Another $40,000 went to a luxury car dealership. The rest seems to be bleeding out in cash withdrawals and consulting fees paid to himself." She took off her glasses and looked at me. "Charlie, this is not just bad parenting. This is grand larceny. This is wire fraud. This is mortgage fraud. We are looking at multiple felonies." She paused, letting the weight of the words settle in the room. "We have 2 options," Caroline said. "Option 1, we approach them privately. We threaten legal action. We force Thomas to sell his assets, if he has any left, to pay off the loan and reimburse you for the rent. We settle this with a non-disclosure agreement. It keeps the family name clean, and you get your property back, eventually." "And option 2?" I asked. "Option 2 is the nuclear option," she said calmly. "We file a formal police report. We provide this evidence to the district attorney. We trigger a criminal investigation. The bank will freeze his accounts immediately upon notification of fraud. He will likely be arrested." The room was silent. I looked at Walter. He didn't say a word. He was letting this be my choice. I thought about option 1. It was the safe choice. It was the choice a good daughter would make. It would save my mother from public shame. It would keep Lena's world from collapsing. Thomas would probably spin a story about how he fixed a misunderstanding, and life would go on. He would still be the successful businessman at the country club, and I would still be the charity case who needed his help to untangle a mess. Then I thought about the tricycle in the driveway. I thought about the 3 years of letters I never received. I thought about the nights I sat in the dark because I was afraid of the electric bill. "If we settle privately," I said, my voice steady, "he will lie about it. He will tell everyone he gave me the house. He will tell everyone he paid off the loan. He will make himself the hero and me the burden." "He likely will," Caroline agreed. "I don't want his money," I said. I want what is mine, but that is not the goal. I want the truth. I want it on the record. I want it so clear that he can never spin it again." I looked at Caroline. "Option 2. But I don't want the police knocking on his door on a random Tuesday. I want to control the environment." "What do you mean?" Walter asked. "Christmas Eve," I said. "They will all be there. Thomas, Rachel, Lena. They will be feeling safe. They will be drunk on their own success. I want them to hear the truth when they have nowhere to run." Caroline nodded slowly. "A confrontation allows us to secure immediate admissions if we handle it right, but for a criminal case, we need the police involved." "Can they wait?" I asked. "Can we file the report but ask them to intervene only when we signal? I want to confront him. I want to see his face when he realizes I know. And when he tries to lie his way out of it, which he will, I want the police to walk in." Caroline pursed her lips, thinking, "It is unorthodox. However, given the flight risk and the potential for destruction of evidence, specifically, if Thomas realizes you know, he might try to wipe his laptop or shred the physical files he keeps at home. We can frame this as a necessary step to secure the scene. I can speak to a contact I have in the Economic Crimes Division. We can file the initial complaint on the morning of the 24th. We will request that they execute a search warrant and an arrest warrant that evening, based on the likelihood of the suspect fleeing or destroying evidence once the fraud is exposed." "Do it," I said. For the next 24 hours, we worked like a military unit. Walter was the financier and the gatherer. He contacted the bank's corporate security division, bypassing the local branch, alerting them to the fraudulent mortgage. He obtained certified copies of the original deed from the county clerk. He even managed to track down the notary who had witnessed the fake power of attorney, a man who, it turned out, was an old golf buddy of Thomas. My role was different. I wasn't a lawyer, and I wasn't a millionaire, but I was a data analyst. For years, I had spent my days at Luma Vista cleaning messy data sets, finding patterns in chaos. Now, I turned those skills on my own family. I took the bank statements Walter had obtained and digitized them. I created a master spreadsheet. Column A, date of rent deposit. Column B, date of unauthorized withdrawal. Column C, Langley family social media activity. The correlation was sickeningly perfect. July 12th, $2,400 deposited from Blue Harbor Stays. July 14th, Rachel posts a photo of a new designer handbag on Instagram. Caption, treating myself. Cost, $2,000. September 3rd, $2,400 deposited. September 4th, Thomas pays the initiation fee for the Platinum Golf Circle. November 10th, the massive loan disbursement of $150,000 hits the Langley Lifestyle Ventures account. November 15th, Lena posts a save the date for her graduation party, featuring a venue that required a $10,000 deposit. I built a timeline. I color-coded the theft. I visualized the data until it wasn't just numbers anymore. It was a map of my exploitation. Every latte, every tank of gas, every vacation they took was funded by the equity of my future. I printed the charts. I put them in a binder. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a presentation. On the morning of Christmas Eve, Caroline called. "It is set," she said. "The report is filed. Detective Miller and his partner will be parked down the street from the Hawthorne Hills residence starting at 7 o'clock. They will wait for my text. Once I give the signal, they will execute the warrant to seize electronic devices and bring Thomas in for questioning regarding the mortgage fraud. You are coming? I asked. I wouldn't miss it, Caroline said. I will arrive separately, about 30 minutes after dinner starts. I will introduce myself as your legal counsel. That will be the trigger. I hung up the phone. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the hotel room. I had showered and done my hair. Pulling it back into a severe, sleek bun, I put on the hunter green velvet dress. It was the only nice thing I owned, the one I had bought on clearance. I looked at my reflection. I saw the girl who had spent years apologizing for taking up space. I saw the girl who had believed she was worthless because her bank account was empty. But then I looked closer. I saw the eyes of the woman who had walked up to that house in Marigold Bay and recorded the truth. I saw the woman who had analyzed the data and found the smoking gun. I reached into my bag and checked that the binder was there. I checked that the voice recorder was fully charged. I wasn't going to Hawthorne Hills to eat roast duck. I wasn't going to exchange gifts. I was going to burn the house down, not with fire, but with the truth. Ready? Walter asked from the doorway. He was wearing his tuxedo, looking like a general preparing for his final battle. I smoothed the fabric of my dress. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of rain and expensive hotel soap. I am ready, I said. I picked up my purse. I didn't need luck. I had the receipts. Charlie, please, Thomas said, his voice dropping to that patronizing, reasonable tone he used when negotiating a bad deal. He reached out as if to touch my hand, but I pulled back as though his skin were coated in acid. You are overreacting. You are seeing malice where there is only strategy. We are a family. We pool resources. That is what families do. This was a temporary financial maneuver to ensure stability for everyone, including you. Stability? I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. For 3 years, I have been deciding which meal to skip so I could afford bus fare. I have been living in an apartment where the walls are so thin I can hear my neighbor cough. While I was doing that, you were using the rent from my house to pay for golf club memberships and trips to Europe. Rachel laughed nervously, a high-pitched, brittle sound that grated against the crystal glasses. Oh, stop it. Charlie, you are making it sound like you are living on the street. We raised you to be resilient. We wanted you to have the satisfaction of making your own way. We were going to give the money back. It was an investment, a silent partnership. A partnership implies consent, I said, my voice rising just enough to cut through the ambient Christmas jazz playing softly in the background. A partnership implies I know about it. Tell me, Mother, why did I never receive a single letter from Grandpa? 3 years of letters, checks, where did they go? Rachel looked away, smoothing the napkin on her lap with manic intensity. We were protecting you, she mumbled. Walter spoils you. We didn't want you to become entitled. Entitled? I slammed my hand on the table, making the silverware jump. You stole my mail. You committed a federal crime because you wanted to keep me poor enough to control. Oh my God, stop being such a drama queen, Lena groaned. Throwing her hands up, she looked at me with a mix of annoyance and genuine confusion, as if my poverty were a personal stylistic choice I had made to embarrass her. Seriously, Charlie, this is so embarrassing. So Mom and Dad borrowed some money. Who cares? If you were smart enough to get a better job, you wouldn't be crying over a few $1,000s. You are nearly 30. Why are you still blaming them for your life? If you worked as hard as I do at my networking, you could buy your own house instead of waiting for Grandpa to hand you one. I looked at my sister. She was wearing a cashmere sweater that cost more than my monthly food budget. She genuinely believed she had earned her life. She had no idea that her networking was funded by the theft of my security. You think you work hard? I asked quietly. Lena, the only reason you aren't waiting tables right now is because Dad pays your credit card bill with checks signed in my name. Take that back, Lena screeched, her face flushing pink. Walter didn't say a word. He simply reached into his bag and pulled out a tablet. He tapped the screen and propped it up against the centerpiece so everyone could see. It was the video I had recorded at Marigold Bay just 3 days ago. On the screen, the image was shaky for a moment before stabilizing on the front porch of the lake house. The audio was crisp. "I am so sorry to bother you," my voice on the recording said. "I am a relative of the landlord, Thomas Langley." Then, the tenant's voice filled the dining room. "Oh, Mr. Langley. Yes, wonderful man. We have been here 2 years, and he has never raised the rent on us. $2,400 is a steal. Direct deposit to his personal account." Then, the video cut to a second clip. It was older footage. Something Walter must have dug up from social media or a private investigator. It showed Thomas standing on the deck of the lake house, shaking hands with the tenant. David. Thomas looked tan, confident, the master of the estate. "I am glad we could come to an agreement." "David," Thomas said on the screen, his smile wide and fake. "The owner, my daughter, is traveling abroad for charity work. She is thrilled to have such responsible tenants. She trusts me to handle everything." The video ended. The screen went black. Thomas sat frozen. The man on the screen was the man he pretended to be. Wealthy, benevolent, in control. The man at the table was sweating, his lies stripped away layer by layer. Rachel stared at the blank screen, her face draining of color. She turned slowly to Thomas. "You told me the house was empty," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. "When you brought home that extra cash 2 years ago, you told me you had closed a consulting deal with a firm in Chicago. You said the house was sitting there gathering dust." Thomas's head snapped toward her. "I did not. You knew. You were the one who said we needed liquidity because Lena wanted to transfer to that private college. You said, 'Do whatever it takes. Thomas, just don't let us look poor.'" "I never told you to steal from Charlie," Rachel shouted, her poise shattering. "I told you to fix the business. You said you had it under control. You said the money was legitimate." "And who spent it, Rachel?" Thomas roared back, slamming his fist on the table. "Who needed the new Audi? Who needed the membership at the country club to keep up appearances with the neighbors? You think that money grows on trees? I was keeping this family afloat." "By robbing your daughter?" Rachel shrieked. "You made me an accomplice. If people find out—" "Oh, worry about the neighbors. Why don't you?" Thomas sneered. "You are just as guilty. You signed the thank you cards for the gifts we bought with that money." I let out a laugh. It started low in my throat and bubbled up until it filled the room. It was a dry, hollow sound, devoid of any humor. It was the sound of something breaking inside me, or perhaps the sound of chains falling off. They stopped screaming and looked at me. "Look at you," I said, shaking my head. "For my whole life, you made me feel like the failure. You made me feel like I was the one who didn't understand how the world worked. But this is it, isn't it? This is the big secret. You aren't successful. You are just better at lying." "Charlie, stop," Rachel whimpered, tears streaming down her face now, ruining her makeup. "I am your mother. I carried you. I raised you. I sacrificed everything for you children. How can you be so cruel? We were drowning. We needed help. Is it so wrong to expect a little help from family?" "Help is asked for. Mother," I said coldly. "Help is not forged signatures and stolen deeds. And don't talk to me about sacrifice. Raising a child is a responsibility, not a license to sell their future to the highest bidder." "We didn't sell your future," Thomas insisted, his face purple. "We leveraged an asset. That is business. If the market had turned, I would have paid it back next month." "The market didn't turn, Thomas," Walter said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. "You did." Walter stood up. He looked tall, looming over the table. "I have sat at this table for 30 years, he said, looking at his son with pure disgust. "I have watched you preen and boast. I thought you were just arrogant. I did not know you were a parasite." The word hung in the air, parasite. "Grandpa?" Lena whispered. She was looking back and forth between her parents, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrific realization. Is it true? Did you guys really steal her house?" Lena, honey, it is complicated, Rachel sobbed, reaching for her. Don't touch me, Lena said, recoiling. She looked at the ring on her finger. The ring Thomas had bought her. She looked at me. I didn't know, Charlie. I swear to God, I thought Dad was crushing it. It doesn't matter what you knew, Thomas snapped, trying to regain control. He stood up, adjusting his suit jacket, trying to summon the ghost of his authority. Enough, all of you. This is a family matter. We are Langleys. We do not air our dirty laundry. We do not sue each other. Charlie, you are angry. Fine. We will work out a payment plan. I will write you a promissory note right now. But this stays in this room. Nobody goes to the authorities. Nobody talks to lawyers. That is the rule. He looked at me with a desperate, bullying intensity. You are my daughter. You will not destroy this family over money. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike, and then taught me that I wasn't worth the cost of the bike. You destroyed this family 3 years ago. Dad, I said, I am just the demolition crew. I looked toward the archway of the dining room. Caroline, I called out. The heavy oak doors opened. Caroline Price stepped into the room. She was an imposing figure in her dark suit, holding a leather briefcase. She didn't look at the Christmas tree. She didn't look at the food. She looked straight at Thomas. Who the hell are you? Thomas demanded, blustering. How did you get in here? This is a private residence. The door was unlocked, Caroline said smoothly. She walked to the table and stood next to me. She placed her briefcase on the table, right on top of Thomas's linen napkin. I am Caroline Price, she said, her voice clear and professional. I am a senior partner at Hayes & Alder. Thomas's face went white. He knew the firm. Everyone knew the firm. They were sharks. I am not here to enjoy your hospitality, Caroline continued. I am here representing my client, Ms. Charlie Drake. She is my daughter, Thomas shouted. She doesn't need a lawyer. Caroline turned her cold gaze on him. Tonight, she said, she is not your daughter. She is the victim of grand larceny, forgery, and mortgage fraud, and I am here to ensure that the conversation from this point forward is strictly on the record. She opened her briefcase. Now, she said, shall we discuss the surrender of assets, or shall I signal the officers waiting down the street to execute the warrant? Caroline placed a thick, leather-bound folder on the table. The sound of it hitting the wood was heavier than the silence that had preceded it. It was a dull, authoritative thud that signaled the end of the emotional argument and the beginning of the legal dismantling. She did not sit down. She stood at the head of the table, next to me, treating the dining room like a courtroom and my parents like hostile witnesses. Let us be precise, Caroline began, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. We are moving past the realm of family grievances. We are now discussing the penal code. She opened the folder and turned it so Thomas and Rachel could see the first document. It was a copy of the deed Walter had produced earlier, but this one was overlaid with red markers highlighting specific clauses. Charlie Drake is the sole, legal, and undisputed owner of the property at 1204 Lakeside Drive, Caroline stated. This deed is absolute. It contains no provisions for a custodian or a proxy. Therefore, every action taken regarding this property without Ms. Drake's wet ink signature is not merely unauthorized. It is legally void. She flipped the page. The lease agreement with the current tenants? Void, she continued. The assignment of rent payments to your personal checking account? Theft by conversion. The diversion of United States mail intended for the property owner to a different address? That is obstruction of correspondence, a federal felony. Thomas wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. We were acting as de facto agents, he stammered, his voice lacking its usual boom. In the business world, implied consent is a standard practice when parties are related. There is no implied consent in forgery. Mr. Langley, Caroline said, cutting him off with surgical precision. She pulled out a new document, one I recognized from our war room session at the hotel. It was the loan agreement for the $150,000. But the most pressing matter, Caroline said, is this: you did not just rent out the property, you used it as collateral. Rachel gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Collateral? Thomas, you said you got an unsecured business line of credit. Caroline ignored her and kept her eyes on Thomas. You forged a power of attorney document. You used that forgery to secure a loan of $150,000 against the equity of a house you do not own. You placed the funds into a corporate account for Langley Lifestyle Ventures. Thomas sat up straighter, trying to regain his footing. That is a legitimate holding company, and that loan it is a bridge loan, a temporary liquidity injection. I have a deal closing in February that will cover the principal plus 20%. I will pay off the lien before the bank even sends the next statement. Charlie will never know the difference. I am doubling her equity, essentially. Caroline stared at him for a long moment, then slowly shook her head. It was a look of pity mixed with contempt. There is no deal closing in February. Thomas, she said softly. She pulled out a balance sheet, the ink still fresh. We ran a forensic audit on Langley Lifestyle Ventures yesterday, she said. The company is insolvent. The $150,000 is not invested in a merger. It is gone. It was used to service debt on 3 other maxed-out credit cards, to pay the lease on this house, which you are 3 months behind on, by the way, and to fund personal lifestyle expenses. The room went dead silent. This house, Rachel whispered. We don't own this house. You rent it, Caroline clarified. And you are facing eviction, but that is your problem. My client's problem is that the loan secured against her property is currently 30 days past due. If you default, which, given your balance of $12.40, is imminent, the bank will initiate foreclosure proceedings on the Marigold Bay property. I felt the blood drain from my face. I knew this. Of course. We had discussed it at the hotel. But hearing it said aloud, in front of them, made the danger feel physical. They hadn't just stolen my past income, they had strapped a bomb to my future. If the bank moves to foreclose, Caroline said, Charlie loses the house. She is the only victim here. She is the one who loses the asset. You simply walk away with the cash you have already spent. Thomas opened his mouth to argue, but Caroline held up a hand. Stop, she commanded. I am not interested in your explanations. I am interested in damage control. I have prepared 2 paths for this evening. You will choose one before dessert is served. She slid 2 distinct piles of paper across the table toward Thomas. Option A, she said, pointing to the thinner stack. You sign this confession of judgment. You admit to the forgery and the fraud in writing. You agree to transfer any and all remaining assets, including your cars, your jewelry, and the contents of your retirement accounts, to a trust controlled by Charlie to pay down the mortgage lien immediately. You will agree to full cooperation with the bank's fraud department to untangle the title, admitting that you acted alone and without her knowledge. That will ruin me, Thomas choked out. The bank will blacklist me, my reputation at the club, my investors. Option B, Caroline continued, ignoring his whining. We decline to settle. I step aside, and the detectives waiting down the street execute the search warrant for this property. They will seize your computers, your phones, and your files. You will be arrested tonight for grand larceny, identity theft, and mortgage fraud. The investigation will be public. It will be on the morning news. She leaned in close. And given the amount, over $100,000, you are looking at mandatory prison time. Thomas, not a slap on the wrist. Real, federal prison time. The grandfather clock ticked in the hallway. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Lena let out a strangled sob. Mom? Dad? Do something. You can't go to jail. What about me? What about my trip? What about my graduation? She turned to Caroline, her eyes wide and wet. Please, you have to go easy on them. I didn't know any of this. I am innocent. I shouldn't be punished for their mess. Caroline looked at my sister. Her expression didn't soften. Ignorance is a defense in criminal court. Lena, Caroline said coolly, But it is not a shield against reality. You are 24 years old. You have been living on the proceeds of a crime. You might not be wearing handcuffs tonight, but do not mistake that for innocence. You have a moral debt to your sister that you haven't even begun to acknowledge." Lena shrank back, biting her lip, looking at me with a mixture of fear and resentment, as if I were the one ruining her life by refusing to be a victim any longer. "I can't sign this," Thomas whispered, staring at the confession. "It admits everything. It admits malice." "It admits the truth," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. I hadn't spoken for several minutes, letting Caroline dismantle them, but now I needed them to hear me. "I don't want your apologies," I said, looking my father in the eye. "I don't want you to tell me you love me. I don't want to hear about how hard it was for you. I want the deed to my house clean. I want the debt off my name. And I want a piece of paper that says, in black and white, that you did this. I want the truth to be a legal fact, not a family secret we whisper about." Thomas's face twisted. The fear was turning into anger, the cornered rat finally snapping. "You are ungrateful," he hissed. "After everything we gave you, we put a roof over your head for 18 years. We fed you, and now you bring a lawyer into our home on Christmas Eve? You are a traitor. Charlie, you are betraying your own blood." "Betrayal?" Walter's voice boomed from the other end of the table, startling everyone. My grandfather stood up. He was trembling, not with age, but with a fury so intense it seemed to vibrate the air around him. "Betrayal is not hiring a lawyer," Walter said, his voice shaking with emotion. "Betrayal is looking your daughter in the face while you steal the food off her plate. Betrayal is watching her freeze in a cheap apartment while you play big shot with her inheritance. Betrayal is tricking your own child." He pointed a shaking finger at Thomas. "She is standing up for herself, and if that feels like a betrayal to you, it is only because you relied on her weakness to survive. You are the traitor. Thomas, you betrayed the most sacred duty a man has, to protect his child." Thomas slumped back in his chair, deflated by his father's judgment. Rachel was weeping into her hands, her shoulders shaking. The glamorous facade of the Langley family was gone. There was only a broke, desperate man and a woman who had looked the other way for too long. Caroline checked the slim silver watch on her wrist. "It is 8:15, she said. "The officers have been instructed to approach the door at 8:16 if I have not texted the stand-down code." She looked at Thomas. "The pen is right there." The room seemed to compress. The air was too thin to breathe. I watched Thomas's hand hover over the paper. I watched him struggle with his ego, his greed, and his terror. He looked at the door. He looked at the window. He looked for a way out, but there were no exits left. Then it happened. Ding dong. The sound of the doorbell was cheerful, melodic, and utterly terrifying. Thomas jumped as if he had been shot. Rachel stopped crying and stared at the hallway with wide, horrified eyes. Lena let out a sharp gasp. It wasn't a neighbor with a fruitcake. It wasn't a carol singer. We all knew who was on the other side of that door. Caroline didn't move to open it. She just looked at Thomas. "That is the sound of your options expiring," she said. "The private dispute is over. The law is now in the room." I looked at the heavy front door reflected in the hallway mirror. The boundary between family business and criminal investigation had just been crossed. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what would happen next. I was just ready for the heavy lifting to be over. The doorbell rang again, a second, more insistent chime that echoed through the high ceilings of the foyer. Thomas jumped, his knees actually knocking against the underside of the table. He looked at the heavy oak door as if it were a portal to hell that had suddenly materialized in his hallway. "It is the neighbors," he said, his voice pitching up into a frantic, breathless squeak. He looked around the table, his eyes darting wildly, begging us to believe a lie that was dead on arrival. "It must be the Johnsons. They probably brought over some of that spiced cider. Or maybe a package delivery. You know how Amazon is these days, delivering at all hours. I will just send them away." He made a move to stand up, but his legs seemed to fail him. He sank back down, gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles turned the color of bone. Rachel wasn't even trying to pretend. She was staring at her husband with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. Her hand was trembling so violently that her wine glass was vibrating against the tablecloth, creating a tiny rhythmic ticking sound that maddeningly synchronized with the grandfather clock. She knew. She knew that neighbors did not ring the bell with that kind of authority, and she knew that the game of musical chairs they had been playing with my life had finally stopped. Walter looked at me. His expression was unreadable, ancient and heavy, like a mountain that had weathered 1,000 storms. He nodded once toward the hallway. "Go answer it, Charlie," he said softly. "No," Thomas shouted, half rising. "I am the man of this house. I will answer my own door." "Sit down, Thomas," Walter barked, a command that slammed my father back into his chair. Walter turned his eyes back to me. "For 29 years, you have been a guest in your own life. Charlie, you have let them tell you who belongs and who does not. But not tonight." He leaned forward, his gaze locking with mine. "This time," Walter said, "you decide who is the stranger in this house." I stood up. My legs felt surprisingly solid. The trembling that had plagued me earlier in the evening was gone, replaced by a cold, humming energy. I walked out of the dining room and into the long, polished hallway. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor. Click, click, click. It sounded like a countdown. With every step, I felt a physical sensation of severing. I was walking away from the little girl who begged for approval. I was walking away from the teenager who accepted the smallest room. I was walking away from the woman who ate ramen noodles while her family feasted on her equity. I reached the door. I didn't hesitate. I turned the brass lock and pulled it open. The cold winter air rushed in, biting at my bare arms, but it felt clean. Standing on the porch, illuminated by the festive wreath lights, were 3 men. 2 were uniformed police officers, their breaths clouding in the freezing air. The third was a man in a thick wool coat, holding a briefcase, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Ms. Charlie Drake?" the man in the wool coat asked. "That is me," I said. "I am Stephen Vance," he said, flashing a badge that identified him as a risk management officer for the bank. "I am accompanied by Officers Miller and Hernandez. We are here regarding the immediate security of the collateral located at 1204 Lakeside Drive, and to execute a warrant regarding suspected fraudulent activity connected to this address." I stepped back, opening the door wider. "Please, come in." Thomas came stumbling into the hallway then, wiping his sweaty palms on his trousers. He saw the uniforms and stopped dead, his face going slack. "What is this?" Thomas stammered. He tried to summon his country club voice, the booming baritone he used to intimidate waiters, but it came out thin and reedy. "Officers, is there a problem? We are in the middle of a family dinner. Surely this could have waited until morning." Officer Miller stepped forward. He was a large man who looked like he had 0 patience for suburban theatrics. "Mr. Thomas Langley?" he asked. "Yes, I am he," Thomas said, puffed up slightly, "and I demand to know why you are interrupting my Christmas Eve." "We are here to secure evidence," Officer Miller said flatly. "We have a warrant authorizing the seizure of all electronic devices and financial records associated with Langley Lifestyle Ventures, based on a credible report of grand larceny and bank fraud filed earlier today." "Fraud?" Thomas laughed, a shrill, hysterical sound. He clutched his chest, doing a terrible impression of a man having a heart attack. "Oh, this is ridiculous. It is a misunderstanding. Finance is a complex game. Officers, complicated. Sometimes wires get crossed. My attorney will clear this up in 5 minutes. There is no need for a scene." Stephen Vance, the bank representative, stepped around a decorative vase. "Mr. Langley, there is nothing complicated about a defaulted loan secured by a forged power of attorney. We are not here to debate finance. We are here because you are 30 days past due on a loan of $150,000, secured by a property you do not own, and we have reason to believe you are a flight risk." "Flight risk?" Rachel shrieked from the dining room doorway. She was clinging to the doorframe as if the house were shaking. "Thomas, you said you paid that installment. You said the deal closed." "I was moving funds," Thomas yelled back at her, sweat dripping down his nose. "I just needed a few more days." "Sir?" Officer Miller interrupted, his hand resting near his belt. "We need you to step aside. We need to collect your laptop, your phone, and any physical files related to the Marigold Bay property." "You can't take my laptop," Thomas said, backing away, shielding the entrance to his home office with his body. "My whole business is on there. My contacts. My proprietary data." "That is the point, sir," the officer said. And then, the moment shattered completely. Lena walked out of the dining room. She looked small, stripped of her usual arrogance. She was holding her phone, but for once, she wasn't looking at it. She was looking at the police officers, and then at her father, who was cowering against a wall. "Dad?" she asked, her voice trembling like a child's. "What are they talking about? What loan?" "Go back inside, Lena," Thomas snapped. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns her if her tuition was paid with the proceeds of that loan," Caroline Price said, stepping into the hallway behind me. She stood like a sentinel, calm and dangerous. Lena looked at me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a sudden, horrifying clarity. She looked at the police, then at the bank representative, and then she said the words that would seal her parents' fate forever. "I thought it was Grandpa's money," Lena sobbed, the words tumbling out in a rush of panic. "He told me Grandpa gave him the money. I didn't know the lake house was yours. Charlie, I swear. Mom told me that house belonged to the family trust. I didn't know I was spending your rent money." The silence that followed was absolute. Officer Miller looked at his partner. The partner made a note in his notebook. "Thank you, Miss," Officer Miller said. "That statement establishes that the ownership of the property was actively concealed from members of the household." Rachel let out a sound that was half gasp, half wail. She slumped against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor in her expensive silk dress. She looked at Lena with betrayal, but Lena was just crying, terrified, realizing that her ignorance had just become the prosecution's star evidence. I didn't mean," Lena stammered, looking at Thomas. Thomas looked at his favorite daughter, the one he had spoiled, the one he had protected, and saw the destruction of his defense. He couldn't claim it was a family agreement anymore. He couldn't claim I knew. His own princess had just confirmed the lie was total. "All right," Officer Miller said. "Mr. Langley, Mrs. Langley, we need those devices, now." I watched as Thomas, broken and weeping, led the officers into his study. I watched them unplug the sleek silver laptop, the machine he used to check stock prices he couldn't afford, the machine he used to forge my name. An officer placed the laptop into a clear evidence bag. He sealed the top with a strip of red tape. Zip. That sound, that plastic zipper closing, it was the sound of the curtain falling. Everything Thomas had built, the image, the swagger, the business, was now just a piece of hardware in a police bag. It looked so small. It looked so pathetic. "We will need you to come down to the station for a formal statement, Mr. Langley," Officer Miller said. "You too, Mrs. Langley." "Now?" Rachel whispered from the floor. "But it is Christmas Eve." "Crime doesn't take a holiday, ma'am," the officer said, not unkindly but firmly. I turned away. I couldn't watch them anymore. It wasn't pity. It was just finished. I walked back into the dining room. Walter was still sitting at the table, his posture rigid. He looked up as I entered. "It is done?" he asked. "It is done," I said. I looked at the table. The roast duck was sitting in a pool of congealed fat. The candles had burned down low, dripping wax onto the table runner. The wine in Thomas's glass was untouched. It was a scene of interrupted luxury, a snapshot of a life that had been rotting from the inside out for years. I walked over to my chair, the chair at the foot of the table, the kids' seat, where they had put me. I picked up my purse. I looked at the room one last time. I looked at the tree with its crystal ornaments. I looked at the stockings hung by the chimney with care, knowing now that they were filled with lies. I realized then that I would never eat in this room again. I would never sit here and feel small again. I would never wonder if I was worthy of their love again. The people being escorted out of the house by the police weren't my parents. They were strangers. They were strangers who had broken into my life, squatted in my heart, and stolen everything they could carry. But the locks were changed now. I looked at Walter. "Let's go," I said. "I'm not hungry anymore." The heavy front door clicked shut, sealing the cold night air outside, but the temperature in the hallway did not rise. The police officers were gone, taking with them the laptop that held my father's fraudulent empire and the silence that had protected it for so long. Now it was just us, the family, the lawyer, and the truth. We moved back into the dining room, drawn there by a morbid gravity. The room looked like a battlefield after the smoke had cleared. The expensive roast duck sat cold in its congealed fat. The candles had burned down to nubs, weeping wax onto the table runner. Caroline Price did not sit. She stood by the sideboard, opening a fresh folder. She looked at Thomas and Rachel, who were slumped in their chairs like marionettes whose strings had been cut. Thomas was pale, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an exit that didn't exist. Rachel was dabbing her eyes with a linen napkin, her mascara leaving black streaks on the white fabric. "The criminal investigation has begun," Caroline announced, her voice cutting through the sound of Rachel's sniffling. "Whatever happens with the district attorney is now out of our immediate control. However, there is still the matter of civil liability, and more importantly, the matter of mitigation." She slid a document across the table. It stopped right in front of Thomas. "What is this?" Thomas croaked. His voice was a shadow of the booming baritone he had used to command this room only an hour ago. "It is a voluntary asset transfer and cooperation agreement," Caroline explained. "It states that you, Thomas Langley, and you, Rachel Langley, knowingly and voluntarily transfer all interest, rights, and claims regarding the company Langley Lifestyle Ventures to Charlie Drake. It also includes a clause where you surrender any future claim to the Marigold Bay property, acknowledging that all previous claims were based on fraudulent documentation." Thomas stared at the paper. "You want my company? It is bankrupt. You said so yourself." "The company is a shell," Caroline agreed. "But owning it gives Charlie the legal authority to dissolve it properly, to communicate directly with the bank regarding the lien, and to access every single financial record you have tried to hide. It gives her control over the mess you created." "And if I sign?" Thomas asked, looking up with a glimmer of desperate hope. "If you sign, and if you agree to full, transparent cooperation with the forensic audit," Caroline said, "then I am authorized by my client to submit a letter to the district attorney. We will state that the victim has received restitution of control and that the family is resolving the financial dispute internally. It will not stop the charges. Thomas. But it might be the difference between a 5-year sentence and probation with community service." Thomas's face twisted. The fear that had paralyzed him was suddenly replaced by a surge of his old, ugly pride. He slammed his hand down on the table, making the silverware jump. "This is exploitation!" he roared. He stood up, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You are enjoying this, aren't you? You think you are some kind of business mogul now? You are a data entry clerk. Charlie, you make $15 an hour. You don't understand the big picture. You don't understand how leverage works. I was building something for this family, and you are tearing it down because you are too small-minded to see the vision." I sat there, calm and unmoving. 3 hours ago, that shout would have made me shrink. Now, it just sounded like noise. "The vision?" I asked quietly. "Dad, your vision was using my name to borrow $150,000 to pay for your country club dues. That is not business. That is a Ponzi scheme with only one victim." "You don't get it," he spat. "I am the one who knows how to manage assets. I am the one with the connections. Giving you control of the company is a joke. You will run it into the ground." It is already in the ground. Thomas, I said, my voice sharp. You buried it. I am just holding the shovel. I leaned forward. And if the big picture requires me to be homeless so you can drive a luxury car, then no. I don't need to understand it. I just need to end it. I won't sign it, Thomas sneered, crossing his arms. You need me. You need me to talk to the bank. You think they will listen to a girl who buys her clothes at a discount outlet. I am Thomas Langley. I can fix this. I can talk to the loan officers. I just need time. You have no time, a voice said from the other end of the table. Walter stood up. He walked slowly toward Thomas. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked disappointed. A profound, bone-deep disappointment that was far worse than rage. You think you still have leverage because you think you are still my heir, Walter said. Thomas froze. The color drained from his face again. Dad, don't start this. The will is settled. You showed me the draft 5 years ago. 50-50, me and Charlie. That was the old will, Walter said. The will of a man who thought his son was merely incompetent, not criminal. Walter reached into his jacket pocket, the same pocket that had produced the deed, the lease, and the bank statements. He pulled out one final envelope. I visited my solicitor in London before I flew here, Walter said, and I visited a notary in New York yesterday morning. This is my new last will and testament. He placed it on the table. As of 9 o'clock yesterday morning, Walter continued, his voice steady. You, Thomas Langley, are disinherited. You receive nothing, no trust fund, no property, no stocks, not one single dime. Rachel let out a strangled gasp. Walter, you can't. He is your son. He is a thief, Walter said, not looking at her. I will not have my life's work used to pay off gambling debts and fraudulent loans. The entirety of my estate, the portfolio, the properties in London and Connecticut, the liquid assets, is now divided into 2 portions. He looked at me. 80% goes to Charlie Ann Drake, he said, to be held in a protected trust that Thomas cannot touch, cannot borrow against, and cannot manage. And the rest? Rachel whispered, her eyes wide with greed and panic. The remaining 20% goes to the Elizabeth Hayes Memorial Scholarship Fund, Walter said, in honor of your mother, Thomas, a woman who would have died of shame if she saw what you did tonight. Thomas stared at the document. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The realization was hitting him like a physical blow. He had spent his whole life waiting for Walter to die, treating his inheritance like a paycheck he had already earned. He had borrowed against that future, spent against that future, and now, with one sentence, that future had evaporated. You can't do that, Thomas whispered. I have debts. I have investors. They are waiting for, when I die? Walter finished for him. Well, they will be waiting a long time, and when I do go, they will find your pockets empty. This is favoritism, Rachel screamed. Jumping up, her face was twisted and ugly. You always loved her more, just because she plays the victim. What about me? I put up with your son for 30 years. I deserve something. You can't leave us with nothing. I looked at my mother. In that moment, she didn't talk about family. She didn't talk about love. She didn't ask if I was okay. She only talked about her share. You aren't worried about me, are you, Mom? I asked softly. You are just worried that the ATM is broken. Rachel glared at me, panting, but she didn't deny it. Then, a small voice cut through the tension. Charlie? I turned. Lena was standing near the doorway. She had stopped crying, but her face was blotchy and swollen. She looked young, terrifyingly young, and for the first time, I saw the fear of a child who realizes the adults in the room have no idea what they are doing. If I get a job, Lena stammered, wringing her hands. I mean, a real job, not the internship Dad set up. If I work, and I pay you back, can we fix this? Can you tell the police to stop? She looked at me with desperate, naive hope. I can pay you back. I promise. I will sell the bags. I will sell the ring. Just Please don't let them take Dad away. Please don't let us lose the house. My heart squeezed. It would have been so easy to say yes. It would have been so easy to hug her, to tell her we would figure it out, to fall back into the role of the big sister who fixes everything. But I looked at Thomas, who was watching this exchange with calculating eyes, clearly hoping Lena's tears would work where his bullying had failed. "No, Lena," I said. Lena flinched as if I had slapped her. "I don't want your money," I said firmly. "And I can't stop the police. What Dad did isn't something you can fix by selling a handbag. He broke the law. He stole a house." I stood up and walked over to her. I didn't hug her. I stood in front of her, forcing her to look me in the eye. "You want to help?" I asked. "Then stop letting them lie to you. Stop accepting things you didn't earn. Go get that job. But do it for yourself. Do it so you never have to stand in a room like this and wonder who paid for your shoes." I turned back to the table. Caroline was holding the pen out to Thomas. "The offer stands for another 5 minutes," Caroline said. "Sign the transfer, cooperate, or we walk away, and you face the full weight of the prosecution with 0 mitigation and 0 inheritance." Thomas looked at the paper. He looked at Walter, whose face was stone. He looked at Rachel, who was sobbing into the tablecloth. He picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so badly that the tip of the pen scratched the paper. He wasn't signing it because he was sorry. I could see it in his eyes. He was signing it because he thought it was a strategic retreat. He was thinking, "I will sign this now, and then next week I will hire a new lawyer. I will find a loophole. I will talk Walter back into the will." He was still delusional. He still thought he was the smartest man in the room. He scrawled his signature, Thomas Langley, messy and jagged. Caroline pulled the paper away before he could change his mind. She slid it to Rachel. Rachel signed it blindly, tears dripping onto the page, terrified of being left behind. Then, Caroline slid the document to me. "Ms. Drake," she said, "to accept the transfer and the authority to manage the dissolution of the assets." I picked up the pen. It felt heavy, solid. I looked at the signature line, Grantee, Charlie Drake. For 3 years, Thomas had signed my name. He had made me a ghost in my own life. He had used my identity to build a cage for me. I pressed the pen to the paper. I didn't rush. I wrote my name in clear, bold letters. Charlie Ann Drake. The ink dried instantly. It was permanent. I put the pen down. "It is done," Caroline said, closing the folder with a snap. Thomas slumped back in his chair, defeated. "I hope you are happy," he muttered. "You have the wreckage. Good luck with it." "I don't need luck," I said, picking up the folder. "I have the truth." I turned to Walter. "Let's go. Grandpa, I think I am ready to leave." Walter nodded, a faint, proud smile touching his lips. He offered me his arm. We walked out of the dining room, leaving my parents sitting in the ruins of their own greed. We walked down the hallway, past the spot where the police had stood. I opened the front door. The snow had stopped falling. The air was crisp and clear. I stepped out onto the porch, and for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel the weight of the world on my shoulders. I felt the cold air in my lungs, and it tasted like freedom. 3 days after the police left my parents' home, my phone buzzed with the call I had been waiting for. It was Caroline Price. "It is finished, Charlie," she said. Her voice, usually so sharp and professional, held a note of genuine relief. "I just got off the phone with the fraud department at the bank. They have completed their preliminary review of the documents we submitted and the affidavit from the notary. They have formally declared the mortgage agreement void due to forgery and lack of consent." I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since Christmas Eve. "So the lien is gone?" "The lien is lifted," Caroline confirmed. "The debt of $150,000 has been reassigned to Thomas Langley personally, to be addressed in his upcoming criminal proceedings. The property at 1204 Lakeside Drive is yours. Charlie, free and clear, no encumbrances, no tenants. It is just a house now, waiting for its owner." "Thank you, Caroline," I whispered, "for everything." You fought for it, she said. I just filed the paperwork. That evening, Walter picked me up in his rental car. We didn't say much as we drove out of the city, watching the gray slush of the suburbs give way to the pristine, snow-covered pines of Marigold Bay. The knot of anxiety that had lived in my chest for 3 years began to loosen with every mile marker we passed. When we pulled into the driveway, the house was dark, the minivan was gone, the tricycle was gone, the grill had been moved. The family who had lived here, the innocent bystanders in my father's scheme, had moved out yesterday. Walter had arranged a generous relocation package for them from his own funds, ensuring they weren't left stranded by the sudden termination of their lease. I walked up the steps, the wood groaning softly under my boots in the cold night air. Taped to the front door was a small white envelope. I opened it. Inside was a single key and a handwritten note from the wife, Sarah. Dear Ms. Drake, it read, we are sorry for the mess your family put you in. We love this house. We hope you find peace here. It is a good place for healing. I put the key in the lock. It turned with a satisfying, heavy click. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house smelled of lemon polish and cedar. It was empty, but it didn't feel hollow. Moonlight streamed in through the large bay windows, painting silver rectangles on the hardwood floors. I walked into the living room and touched the stone fireplace. I ran my hand along the wall. This was mine. It wasn't just a building. It was the physical manifestation of the safety I had been denied. For years, I had believed I was destined to struggle, that I deserved the damp apartment and the unpaid bills. But standing here, in the silence of the room that should have been my sanctuary, I realized the struggle hadn't been my destiny. It had been a theft. I am sorry, Walter said from the doorway. He was standing with his hands in his pockets, looking old and weary. I should have checked on you sooner. I should have driven to the apartment. I let myself believe the comforting lies Thomas told me because it is easier to believe your son is successful than to believe he is a criminal. I turned to him. The moonlight caught the tears in his eyes. Don't apologize, Grandpa, I said softly. If you had stepped in 3 years ago, I might never have learned how to fight. I would have stayed the quiet, obedient girl who let people walk all over her. I needed to see the truth. I needed to be the one to stop it. He nodded, a small, sad smile touching his lips. You are not that girl anymore. No, I said. I am not? Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the shrill ring of my cell phone. I pulled it out of my pocket. The screen lit up with a photo of Lena and me from 5 years ago, back when I still thought her selfishness was just a phase. I stared at it for a long moment. Then, I slid my thumb across the screen. Hello, Lena, I said. Charlie? Her voice was jagged, broken by heavy sobbing. Charlie, you have to help me. It is a nightmare here. The police took Dad's computer. The bank froze the accounts. She is just lying in bed staring at the ceiling. She won't talk to me. I am sorry you are going through that, I said, keeping my voice steady. I have to get out of here, Lena cried. I can't stay in this house. The neighbors are staring. My friends. I called Jessica and Brittany, and they won't answer. I think they saw the news. Nobody wants to talk to me. She took a ragged breath. Can I come to the lake house, just for a few days? Please, Char, I just need somewhere quiet. I need to get away from them. I won't be a bother. I just need my big sister. I closed my eyes. I could hear the desperation in her voice, the terrified sound of a child whose world had evaporated. The old Charlie. The Charlie who ate the burnt toast so Lena could have the good piece, wanted to say yes. The old Charlie wanted to rescue her, to tell her to pack a bag, to drive over and pick her up. But then I looked around the empty room. I looked at the clean, bare floor. If I let Lena in now, I would be bringing the chaos back with her. I would be teaching her that no matter what happens, someone else will always cushion the fall. I would be enabling the very helplessness that had turned her into a pawn in our parents' game. No, Lena, I said. The line went silent for a second. What? You can't come here, I said. My voice wasn't angry. It was just firm, like a wall that couldn't be moved. This is my home, and right now, I need it to be mine. But I have nowhere to go, she wailed. I have no money, Dad's cards are declined. Then you have a problem to solve, I said. You are 24 years old. You are smart. You have a degree. It is time to use it. You are being cruel, she screamed. You are punishing me because you are jealous. I am not punishing you, I said calmly. I am letting you grow up. For the first time in your life, Lena, you are going to have to survive without using someone else's safety net. It is going to be hard. It is going to be scary. But it is the only way you will ever be free of them. Charlie, please. When you have found a job, I said, and when you are paying your own rent, call me. We can have coffee. We can be sisters. But I will not be your savior. Goodbye, Lena. I ended the call. I stared at the phone in my hand. My heart was pounding. But it wasn't from guilt. It was the adrenaline of setting a boundary that I knew I would never cross again. I put the phone away and took a deep breath. The air in the house seemed to shift, becoming lighter. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was potential. It was space. Space for me to figure out who Charlie Drake was when she wasn't being defined by what she lacked. I walked out onto the back porch. Walter followed me. We stood by the railing, looking out at the lake. The water was pitch black, reflecting the stars like a mirror. The wind rustled through the pine trees, a sound like 1,000 whispering voices. That was hard, Walter observed. Yes, I said, but necessary. Do you regret it? He asked. He turned to look at me, his expression serious. We blew up everything tonight. The family name is ruined. Your parents are facing prison. Your sister is alone. Do you regret taking this to the law? I looked out at the water. I thought about the lie that had been told for 3 years. I thought about the family that was held together by fraud and silence. I didn't break the family. Grandpa, I said. It was already broken. I just turned on the lights. I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling the warmth of my coat against the chill. I refused to live in a lie, I continued. And I refused to let them turn me into a victim to subsidize their fantasy. If that destroyed them, then they were never real to begin with. Walter put his arm around my shoulder and squeezed. You are right, and I am proud of you. I am proud of me too, I said, and for the first time in my life, I meant it. I turned back toward the house. The warm yellow light from the hallway spilled out onto the porch. It looked inviting. It looked like a beginning. Coming in? Walter asked. In a minute, I said. I just want to lock up. Walter went inside. I stood at the threshold for a moment longer, looking at the dark driveway where I had once stood as a stranger recording a video. I stepped inside and closed the heavy door. I turned the deadbolt. Click. I held the silver key in my hand, feeling its cool metal ridges against my palm. I wasn't just holding a piece of brass. I was holding my future. And for the first time, that future wasn't in the hands of my father, or my mother, or even my grandfather. It was entirely, completely mine. Thank you so much for listening to Charlie's story of reclaiming her life. It is a powerful reminder that sometimes the hardest boundaries we set are the ones that save us. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please leave a comment below with your city or country. Let's see how far our community reaches. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share these stories with even more people. Your support means the world to us.